morning, YouTube. Salutations, wherever you're at. So I recently read Sharpe's Rifles by Bernard Cornwell. I've never really cared for these sketch covers all that much. One thing about the Sharpe series is it's been reprinted numerous times, and it's had quite a few different sets of covers. My personal favorite, well, there's two I really like. There's one that's like a set of photographs of memorabilia and implements from the Napoleonic era, and I really like those a lot. And I also like the set that uses there's like these paintings, and they're really fantastic. The paintings are a little bit harder to find. You can find them, but they're just a little harder than the others. But anyway, so if you don't know who Bernard Cornwell is, he's most well known for the Sharpe series, and then the Saxon stories, or the Last Kingdom. The TV, which is the Netflix TV show, The Last Kingdom, is how most people would probably know it. And the Saxon stories, those are about the Viking Age in England, and Uhtred, son of Uhtred, or Uhtred of Bebbanburg. And it's just, he's lost his birthright. The series is basically about him trying to get it back. So the Sharpe series is about Richard Sharpe and takes place during the Napoleonic era, mostly during the Peninsular Wars, which is the British invasion of Spain via Portugal. But he also has adventures all over the place, too. So, but first kind of going over this. So, again, about Bernard Cornwell, I'll cover him just a little bit more real quick. Bernard Cornwell, he's from the UK. He started off as he worked for the BBC and wrote television for him, but he mostly did news and current affairs. He would move to the United States in his late 30s after he got married, because his wife, who he had married, could not stay in the UK because of her family. So he moved to the U.S., and because he couldn't work at first, he started writing books. So worked out pretty well for him. Bernard Cornwell is a decently well-known author, not as well-known in the United States as he is in the UK, though. But anyway, so he would start writing these books basically to make a living. So... But yeah, so that's a little bit of background on Bernard Cornwell. So anyway, Sharpe's Rifles is actually the first book that he wrote out of chronological order. So the original Sharpe series had 11 books in it, and Bernard Cornwell always intended for the series, at least his original intention, was to end at Waterloo. So eventually, though, he would get, I want to say Sharpe's Rifles is like the 9th book in the series. It would get picked up in the late 80s for a TV show, and they asked him to make essentially a prequel book, and that would be and that would end up being Sharpe's Rifles. So Sharpe's Rifles is, like I said, is the first one out of chronological order. So anyway, in my opinion, I think it works a little bit better if you already know the series or read this. It works well because you already kind of know the characters, and it makes it kind of interesting to see how they interact at first, before they, really knew each other. Because in the original book, the original first book that he wrote, which is Sharpe's Eagles, these characters all already know each other. I think he meets Hogan for the first time in Sharpe's Eagles, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But he already knows Sergeant Harper. In Sharpe's Rifles, Harper is not yet a sergeant. So anyway, I'll go over a little bit of Richard Sharpe, because I forgot to do that in my last video about the Sharpe series. So Richard Sharpe is a bastard and grew up in an orphanage. He has no living family, and he's from London, and he grew up pretty rough. So, again, he has no living family. So anyway, by the time he gets to his mid-teens, he's 15 or 16. He does not actually know his own age. So, and he also uses what I think was something they commonly did at the time, how they judged the age by teeth, and he always kind of guesses his age judging by what his teeth are like. And so he does that throughout the series. He'll be like, judging by my teeth, I'm about 32. So, which I guess kind of makes sense, right? You get, especially back then, the older you get, the more your teeth would kind of decay and fall apart and just get rough, right? But anyway, so he joins the British military at a pretty young age, because there's really nothing else he can do to make a living. So, and long before this series starts, eventually. So, like I said, Sharpe's Rifles was the first out of chronological order, but Bernard Cornwell would go on to do that a whole lot more through the rest of the time. So, anyway, I can come back to that here in a second. So, Richard Sharpe, he joins the British military because he can't really do anything else. So, he actually starts in the War of the First Coalition, which is, originally where Napoleon won a whole bunch of battles and stuff. And he is in Flanders. Then he goes to India. He spends many years in India. and luckily doesn't die from, yellow fever or anything. And then eventually would come back and fight in the Peninsular War. So anyway, that's a little bit about Richard Sharpe. He carries a heavy cavalry sword, which is quite thick and heavy, and it's pretty long, about 35, 36 inches. Richard Sharpe is a fairly large person for the time, especially. He's about 6 foot, 6'1", so he can carry this weapon without too much trouble on foot, because he is an infantryman. It's not a standard issue weapon for an infantryman officer, Bernard Cornwell has talked about this a few times. These old heavy cavalry swords would come with like a half moon shape on the top, and guys in the field would grind steeples on them, steeple points, and that way they could jab with them better. So anyway, I'll circle back what I said about Sharpe's rifles being out of publication order. So that being the first one out of publication order, Bernard Cornwell would go on to do this more often. So after Waterloo, he writes another book which is called Sharpe's Devil, which takes place about 5 or 6 years later. But after that, he would go on to fill in time gaps. He would do like a 5-book prequel series, 3 of which take place in India, which are actually some of my absolute favorites in the series. So definitely check them out. Those are definitely worth reading. I kind of like reading it in publication order, but you could very well just start there at what he is the first book. In chronological order, which are those books in India, the Battle of Versailles and stuff. At the time when I first read those 3 books that take place in India, I didn't know that much about the British military history there, so it was just really interesting to me at the time, and still is, and it would lead to me learning a lot more about that. So, and I've always really enjoyed those. Anyway, so the premise and the plot of the book, though. Basically what happens is the British Army is retreating. They've had some issues, and now they're retreating. Most of the book takes place in Galicia, which is northwestern Spain. And the regiment is broken off from the British Army. It's really just a company, and they are separated. And what happens is the captain of that company dies, Captain Murray. And this is when he gives his sword to Sharpe. At the time, Sharpe is... When the book begins, he's like he's not off. He's in charge of supplies. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. Not a mess officer, but kind of like that. And so he's not in like a position of fighting at that particular time. And like I said, he's in charge of supplies and stuff. But he becomes the only officer left. So he's the highest ranking officer by default. And so he kind of he takes command of these soldiers, but they're kind of in a predicament because if they keep going north, they are and try to follow the rest of the British Army that they were with. They are, the French army is in between them, so they not really the best way to go because of the French army being in the way, and so it kind of creates a conflict. At this time, if you know the characters, Harper is not yet a sergeant. So anyway, they're broken off, and there's about 50 of them, and the men have kind of come to the conclusion that they don't want to go to Lisbon. So that's what Sharpe wants to do. He wants to go south to Lisbon, where there's supposed to be a British garrison, although there's rumors that the British garrison has left, and they're not there anymore. They think they might not be there, at least by the time they get there. And it's about 200 miles away, so which is quite a journey, something we don't really appreciate in our modern day, just how much walking and how far it is to get to places. So anyway, they basically become mutinous. They don't want to follow Sharpe south to Lisbon. So what ends up happening is Harper confronts Sharpe, and they end up getting into a fist fight, a pretty brutal one. Something about these books is they can be quite violent. It's up to you. It's up, as a person, if how you want to take that. I don't think it glorifies violence. I think Bernard Cornwell does a pretty good job of showing just how miserable existence would be at this time. I don't mind violence in books. Some people don't like it, so just keep that in mind. But again, in the real world, there is violence, and it's just the way of things. So, and it's a large part of human nature. So anyway, but these books I think they're quite fun, and they're a fun action adventure. So, but yeah. Anyway, so they start off and the group is mutinous, and they're telling Sharpe they don't want to do that. They do end up kind of listening to Sharpe, and there ends up being, so the Spanish army and government has basically collapsed, and they meet up with a Spanish noble named Vivar, and he ends up leading them. He takes them west and is kind of going southwest, and he helps them, and the men all of a sudden are listening to this Vivar because he's a nobleman. At this time, Sharpe has gained rank, and has become had been given an officer commission, which was incredibly rare at this time. Maybe only like 5% of the officers came from the ranks, or not of some kind of nobility, or at least some kind of wealth, because this was during the time of the purchase system. If you don't know what the purchase system is, you can go back and watch my other video. I'm not going to get into all of it right now, but basically you could buy rank in the British military, and there were positives and negatives to this. So anyway, but the men are so conditioned to listening to these noblemen and more wealthy people that they just aren't used to listening to somebody like Sharpe. And it's a big plot point throughout the book. Eventually he kind of gains their respect and they start to listen to him more. But anyway, so that they're listening. So they're listening to Vivar. It kind of upsets Sharpe, but Vivar, he's been doing it his whole life. He's been a nobleman his whole life, so it comes a little more naturally to him. And a lot of the plot of the book is kind of Vivar almost kind of manipulating Sharpe and his men, but they do end up helping him. He basically wants to take this it's like an old flag, and wants to take it to the city. I can't remember what the city's called off the top of my head. It's Santiago de Compostela, I think, is the city. And they take it, and it ends up being them trying to take this city. There's some trickery involved, and they do eventually get the city and hang the flag. I feel like they didn't actually hang the flag at the cathedral, though, but they take it into battle as like a, basically as a, I'm trying to think how you would describe that. So they take the flag, and they raise it up, and they take it into a battle, and the Spanish, regulars and Sharpe's company, they end up winning this little battle, and that spreads all throughout Spain. It helps inspire the Spanish partisans. The Spanish partisans are just guerrilla fighters, and of course, it notoriously caused the French army lots and lots of problems, and that's kind of a theme throughout the book too. The French are afraid of Spanish knives at night, so. And Napoleon used to call it his open sores with Spain, so, and will cause them a lot of trouble. The British garrison still ends up being at Lisbon, so eventually after they win this little battle in the north, they do end up going back down to Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal, where there's a British garrison, and they go there, and they do end up making it there eventually. So, they help Vivar, and they go to the garrison, and, it ends up working out pretty well. Harper ends up becoming a sergeant throughout the book because I don't remember the previous sergeant's name, but he's only a minor character, and I don't remember him being in any other books. But and then Harper becomes sergeant after that, although he is reluctant to do it at first. Harper's an Irishman, so he always says he's fighting for the enemy, which is the British to him. Harper's a Catholic, and that's a big theme. Religion is just kind of big in a lot of Cornwell books, honestly. Cornwell is I don't know if he's an atheist, but he's not a religious person, and I know he doesn't care. And from what it sounds like, he doesn't really care for it a lot. He kind of grew up with a very kind of radical religious family, so, and it kind of turned him off to religion. But anyway, so he's a bit of a non-believer, I think, but I don't know that for a fact. So, but it kind of sounds that way. So, but that's a big part of all these books is. The British are Protestant, and they're fighting with Catholics, and even the Spanish are like, I've always kind of thought of the British as the enemy, but obviously they're on the same side because of they're both fighting the French. So, but it's it's a really good book. By this time, when Cornwell wrote this, he had kind of really was starting to hone his skill as a writer, especially writing novels and kind of fiction. So, like I said, at this point, this was like. I think he had written some other non-Sharpe books at this point, too. So he had written at least 8 books prior to this, if not a few more. And you can kind of see he's honed his craft quite a bit at this point. The plot's pretty tight. And everything seems to, everything kind of comes together pretty well at the end. There's not a whole lot of loose ends. Besides the fact that Sharpe is kind of almost like a pulp hero, there's never that kind of third arc, or a third act for him because it always keeps going. At the end of the historical notes in the back of these books, he always says, Sharpe and Harper will march again. So, and it, kind of always keeps going. I don't know how many more books Bernard Cornwell will write. I hope he does write more. I would love to see him write one about Sharpe and Flanders, even though he would have been very young at the time. I think that'd be a very interesting book. Cornwell's in his 80s. I know he said in interviews he's interested in writing more Thomas Hookton books, or at least one more, and even maybe another Uhtred book. So I don't know if we'll get any more books from him or not. Like I said, I hope that we do. I would love for that to happen, but so it's hard telling. And I don't think Cornwell's the kind of author that has books just in his shelf, manuscripts of books that are just going to be published after, that are just waiting for him to die or whatever. So, like, which happens with a lot of authors. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I do hope that he writes more. I did enjoy his 2 newest releases of the Sharpe series. I enjoyed those quite a bit. But anyway, if you've never read any Bernard Cornwell or the Sharpe series before, this you could do worse than starting here. If you want to, I would suggest either publication order or chronological order. So if you start chronological order, you're going to start with the India books, which are very good. I really like those a lot. The first one has the scene. Another thing about Richard Sharpe is he's been flogged before. So anytime people see that and find out that he's an officer, it's very unusual. So, and it always is very striking to people. But anyway, the very first India book actually has Sharpe. He gets flogged in that book. Flogging is a very barbaric and painful punishment, and it makes you cringe anytime it happens to people. It is just, it's awful. But they are essentially whipped and, are held and man, it's painful, man. It's painful stuff, and I want to say Sharpe was lashed 200 times. I might be wrong about that. I think it's 200. It's a lot. Harper's flogged at one time throughout the series too, and he only gets 60, and it breaks him down pretty good. So man, God, it's awful. It's awful to think about. So, but again, that's a big theme of these Sharpe books, and just something that Cornwell does a lot. He shows that existence at this time would not be very pleasant. So, anyway, I definitely recommend this book. It is very good. Like I said, it's not high literature or anything, but I think you can learn something from it. And if it gets somebody interested in history, you definitely get 2 thumbs up from me. So that's what it did for me, at least. So I'll recommend these books till the day I die. And I'll continue reading Bernard Cornwell again for the rest of my life. So I'm going to continue reading the series. I'm going to read Sharpe's Enemy next. I broke publication order because I've been waiting on them from my library. I've been reading them digitally via my library. And the next one wasn't available, so I was like, well, I might as well just read Sharpe's Rifles. It didn't really matter for Sharpe's Rifles anyway because it wasn't in chronological order to begin with. So I thought, well, I guess it made sense to do this. And I actually owned Sharpe's Rifles, the ebook. So I own a lot of these on ebook. I just don't own all of them. So anyway, I just went ahead and decided to read Sharpe's Rifles. But I definitely recommend this book. We'll say 9.5 Baker Rifles out of 10. Like I said, it's really good. It's really good action in this. Not my favorite in the series, but it is very good. So definitely check it out. Really great fight scene of Harper and Sharpe. So, and again, you see them kind of bond and develop that friendship. So definitely check this out. Definitely check out the Sharpe series. And there's going to be more Sharpe videos to come in the future. This is my favorite series of all time. So definitely check it out. Even if you read fantasy, I think this is worth checking out. So if you like fantasy or maybe medieval era stuff, give Sharpe a try. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised by this. But anyway, that's all for today, YouTube. Good night or good day, wherever you're at.